Hello, class. Um, so I'm going to continue with neurotransmitters from where I left off yesterday. GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, is a neurotransmitter that is inhibitory. That means that it is involved in regulating or slowing down the number of synapses that occur. GABA prevents overstimulation of the nervous system and regulates anxiety. Some important agonists for GABA are alcohol and benzodiazepines. Alcohol actually increases the amount of GABA that is available in the system, and therefore it lowers the amount of stimulation that the nervous system is receiving. And of course, that's the most commonly used GABA agonist. The benzodiazepines, however, are a prescription medication that are used to control anxiety, and they are very, very effective for those who need them. The three that I would like you to remember are, first of all, Valium, and you can see that spelled on the left side of the screen here. And Valium was a drug that was produced quite commonly in the 1960s, and then was replaced by other drugs, other benzodiazepines, especially Xanax, XA-NAX, and Ativan, A-T-I-V-A-N. These two benzodiazepines act very, very rapidly in helping to regulate anxiety. They are given on a prescription basis. One thing to keep in mind with the benzodiazepines is that they should not be used with alcohol, as the effect is amplified by the combination of the two. Now, an antagonist for GABA is actually what was the key ingredient in rat poison known as strychnine, S-T-R-Y-C-H-N-I-N-E. Strychnine is an incredibly dangerous chemical. It would cause the person who had strychnine poisoning to have convulsions and would cause death. Now, it is no longer used in rat poisoning, thankfully, and it is not available on the market. This next neurotransmitter are the endorphins. Now, endorphins are, as you can see, I have all of them up here, they alleviate pain. If you've ever had an injury before and you have not felt it right away, that's because endorphins have rushed to the site of the injury. Many people have described breaking a bone or having some other kind of injury. I know for myself, I had gotten pushed in a swimming pool and I had a huge gash in my leg, and I didn't even notice it at first, and that is because the endorphins rushed to the site of that pain and allowed me to get the attention that I needed to take care of my leg, of course, once the endorphins wore off, then it hurt like crazy. Endorphins also produce pleasurable emotions, including the runner's high, which is something, quite honestly, I have never experienced. But some people who are athletes maybe have had that experience where they are running a marathon in the last 5 miles. They feel like they're just floating on air. And so I've heard that described as really a pleasurable experience. Now, endorphins rather, were discovered as being naturally occurring morphine-like substances, opiate-like substances that the brain produces on their own after the Vietnam War. Soldiers were coming back from Vietnam, and there were many that were actually heroin addicts because of the availability in Vietnam of these substances. And as it turns out, it was discovered that we create our own opiate-like substance, and that is what endorphins are. Now, morphine, of course, has been around for a long time. It was used commonly during the Civil War. And heroin, the use of heroin and other opiate poppy plant derivatives goes far, far back in history. Probably the most important agonists for you to know about are the opiates. Morphine, which is used medicinally for pain. Many use it after surgery or if they have extreme cancer pain. Oxycontin and Vicodin are also used for surgical purposes and for recovery purposes after a serious injury. However, the oxy market and the Vicodin market became very lucrative, and now Oxy and Vicodin are highly controlled. They're scheduled substances. If you get a prescription for Oxy or Vicodin, it is reported to the Drug Enforcement Agency. And as a result, unfortunately, heroin has increased in its use in the last several months. Of course, just in the last couple of years, two famous people, Corey Monteith and Philip Seymour Hoffman, have died of heroin overdoses, as have numerous other people. Police departments around the nation have talked about the rise in heroin use. Um, it has become cheap, it has become available across the Mexican border, and all I can really say about that is just say no. Don't do heroin. Um, it is a very, very dangerous drug and can cause addiction in a very, very short time. But you do need to know about endorphins. They're an important chemical that our brain produces in order to help with pain and also to produce those pleasurable emotions during exercise and high strenuous activity. The last neurotransmitter we're going to look at is glutamate. Glutamate is a excitatory neurotransmitter involved in memory. So, um, I kind of have a funny story about this. When my husband and I were first married, we were actually had gone out to eat at a Chinese restaurant. And then when we got home, my husband's like, he couldn't talk. He was like extremely, like his brain said he felt like he was going to explode. And I called his dad, who's a doc, and I said, hey, you know, your son is going crazy here. Let me give you the phone. And so he talked to him, and he sounded like he was really, really out of it. Like he couldn't even string together a coherent set of words. My father-in-law got me on the phone and said, what did you have to eat tonight? And I said, well, we went to eat at a Chinese restaurant. And he said, well, he's probably having a reaction to monosodium glutamate, which is causing him to act very strangely. And if he doesn't get better soon, go to an ER. Well, he did get better soon. We know glutamate has a possible connection to schizophrenia, as well as agonists, such as my husband had with the MSG, can cause migraines and seizures. And he was probably just having an extreme migraine. Antagonists would include alcohol, angel dust, which is known as PCP. And the reason why alcohol acts as an agonist on glutamate, or how we know, is that some people who have had an overabundance of alcohol, the binge drinking, they actually can't remember what happened while they were drinking, and that's because they had so much alcohol that it blocked the glutamate production, and therefore they literally were not able to form the memories. So here's a short video that shows how GABA and glutamate work together when one is drinking alcohol.
Marsha. 6. Marsha. Shut up, Mom! Get the book at asapscience.com. Alcohol, one of the most commonly used and abused drugs in the world, comes in a variety of forms and does one thing quickly and well. It changes the way you feel. But to what do we owe these feelings of release and freedom? How could the ingestion of one simple substance so drastically change not only your actions, but thoughts and perception? As alcohol enters the body and makes its way to your brain, it begins to interact with your neurons or brain cells. In our previous video on marijuana, which you can click here, we explain the actions of neurons and their chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. But there are two main types of neurotransmitters that these neurons use to communicate or send electrical signals. Excitatory neurons use glutamate, while inhibitory neurons use GABA, the yin and yang, if you will. Much like the zeros and ones of a computer, these two messengers have contrasting roles. Glutamate begins a wave of excitation, while GABA not only inhibits this flow, but helps to organize and differentiate the results in your brain. And just like a computer, these signals can be combined in enormous complexity to form actions and thoughts. So how does alcohol affect these two signals? Turns out it suppresses glutamate transmission and enhances GABA transmission, so you get less excitation and more inhibition. And because glutamate sites become less effective, information flow becomes slow, and only the largest signals can make it through. This means you feel less, perceive less, notice less, and remember less. In conjunction, the increased GABA hushes the excessive background noise of activity, fine-tuning and clarifying your thoughts, but to an excessive degree. This is why you may have heard that alcohol is a depressant, but inhibition of your neurons is not the same as social inhibition. Instead, it simply cleans up and removes extraneous activity by removing less significant excitation. Without normal GABA transmission, the excessive excitatory action would resemble an epileptic seizure. there'd be no clarity of thought. While drunk, your GABA channels are wide opened. Combined with the lack of glutamate, you begin to think very little, but with great clarity. It's what causes the momentous attitude of a drunk, often repeating the same idea or proclamation over and over. Thinking clearly about almost nothing. Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe for more weekly science videos. Get the book at asapscience.com. In a world that seems busier by the day, productivity is on the minds of how.
Okay, so there you go. That is how GABA and glutamate work together when we drink alcohol. Now, that might have been a little bit confusing because it went kind of fast, but basically, you're thinking a whole lot about nothing, and you won't remember really what happened. Now, that is the last of the neurotransmitters. We are going to be moving on to the brain. The video that you're going to be watching here, you're going to watch two videos today. The first one is Phineas Gage. This is Phineas Gage here, and he had the very great misfortune of having this giant metal rod go through his head. Now, the next video you're going to watch is a basic introduction to the structure of the brain. So I'll basically introduce it quickly here. We have a brain stem, and this is really where most of the life support functions occur. The cerebellum here is important for balance and coordination, and it's attached to the back of the brainstem. Then we have the midbrain area here, and the midbrain area is going to be responsible for a lot of your like the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions, for memory, for regulation of eating, and many other important life functions. The cerebral cortex is the folded area, and it's kind of like the cap of the brain. The cerebral cortex is going to be responsible for all of the advanced abilities that we have as humans. Right here we can see two strips of cortices. One is called the sensory cortex, the other is called the motor cortex. And so, as I mentioned, in this first video, we'll get an introduction to Phineas Gage, and we'll see how his behavior was impacted by the injury. And then in the second video that you're watching, you'll see some of the brain scanning techniques in action and get an introduction to the brain. And then tomorrow, we'll be starting to look at the very specific functions of the different regions of the brain. So thank you very much for listening. I thought there would be a video on this one, but it didn't seem to work out that way. You probably really didn't need to see me anyways. Thanks for listening.